winding down the biblical story of Jacob, Yaakov, and his family, this family of 12 sons. This is the real beginning of the Jewish people, so to speak, because it's now that the story takes a twist. Ahead of Yaakov and the rest of the brothers, Yosef was sent to Egypt, and because of a famine around the world, Yaakov and the 12 sons and wives and extended family, 70 people altogether, have to come down to Egypt. And we're told that the very last years of Yaakov's life, Yaakov lived a hard life. We know that from Yaakov's birth, he's got this battle with Esav. Esav, in the womb already, they're battling. They come out, Esav is angry, wants to kill him, he has to run away to Lavan. Lavan tries to take advantage of him 100 times. The Arizal explains that the amount of times that he tried to take advantage of him, there was one time in Tzfat, in the 1500s, a great rabbi, one of the rabbis that were famous for explaining the depths of the Torah, his name was Rav Moshe Alshich. He's one of the few rabbis that we call the holy Rav Moshe Alshich. And he was darshaning all of the different ways that Lavan tried to trick Yaakov. And all of a sudden, I can just imagine this scene. The holiest rabbi in the world, the Arizal himself, starts laughing in the middle of the drasha. Could you imagine if, just on our level, if Rabbi was just giving a drasha and all of a sudden the Rosh Yeshiva starts laughing? Anyway, so the Arizal starts laughing in the middle of this drasha from Rav Moshe Alshich, the holy Rav Moshe Alshich. So that people are confused. What in the world is going on? They had to ask, what's going on? Why was the Rav laughing? So he said, I actually saw Lavan. Lavan was actually standing there beside the Alshich, and every time the Alshich explained the Perush, an interpretation of how he tricked Yaakov, he shook his head, yes, I did that. And then all of a sudden one time, I think, this is the way the story goes, but it's still a nice story. I think one time he said, perhaps we can also say another explanation. No, that I didn't do. I didn't think of that one. That I think is when the Arizal left. So if I remember the story correctly, that's how it went. So we can understand Yaakov had a lot to deal with, a lot of troubles. Leaving Lavan, you would think he's going to be okay. First of all, Lavan basically ran after him and said, look, I can kill you and wipe you out. But Hashem said, I can't touch you, so I'll let you go. That's his end with Lavan. He went back to Esav again, thought Esav was going to come to kill him, and he had to appease Esav. We see that night was a very difficult night. He prayed, he sent gifts, and he did a lot of things. He was afraid that was going to be the end of him and his entire family because Esav was coming to kill him. Getting into the land of Canaan, which was going to one day become Israel, but was not yet Israel, getting into the land of Canaan, his daughter's taken and abused. And then he has to fear for his life because when the brothers took retaliation for what was done to their sister Dinah, so Yaakov was afraid that all of the Arab nations would gang up together and attack and kill him and his family, and that would be the end of the Jews. Ironically, we see the same attempt over and over again in history. The 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, they gang up and try to get rid of us. But Baruch Hashem, we're not going anywhere. So Yaakov is now in the land of Canaan trying to survive, and he's forced to come down to Egypt. So after all the trouble and all the struggles that he had to go through, his one attempt, his one wish, his one request from Hashem was, let me live out the end of my days in peace. And instead of getting that peace, Hashem tears away Yosef from him and sends Yosef down to Egypt. And for 22 years, he suffered. He was even in a state of depression because he lost his Ben Zikunim, his precious son that he gave over all of his wisdom to. And we're taught that because you can't have prophecy unless you're in a state of joy. He lost prophecy for all those years as well. The simple meaning of the story that he asked to have tranquility is God's response is that this is not a world for tranquility. Tranquility is when Mashiach comes or in the Gan Eden. This is a world to get working, to get busy. So instead of giving him that blissful tranquility that he asked for, he caused him to suffer by taking Yosef away from him. An alternative way to explain that whole dialogue, so to speak, between Yaakov's inner request to have tranquility and God's answer is no, is this. There's an idea that God fulfills the requests of the righteous. So we can appreciate and say that Hashem responds to Yaakov saying, you want tranquility, you want bliss, you want Mashiach, you want Canaan that's being run by the Arabs that do not believe in me and do not follow a proper way of life. You want all that to change so you can be a Jew living and thriving in the land of Israel. So in order for that to happen, I'm going to have to take Yosef away from you and bring him down to Egypt, because you cannot have the Torah and you cannot become the Jewish nation without passing first through Egypt. You have to go through this period in our lives called Egypt. The suffering, the hardships. But when you're done with Egypt, then you can have what you're asking for. You can have the Torah and you can have Eretz Yisrael, and you will one day live happily ever after. But to give you that which you're requesting, this tranquility, this bliss, this olam haba that you want in this world, I'm going to have to take Yosef away from you. That's the one way to appreciate the answer. So again, he's schlepped down now to Mitzrayim because this is what has to happen. And we're in fact told that he got a taste of the blissful life that he asked for in those final years in Mitzrayim. He lived out the last years of his life in Mitzrayim. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Vayechi means he lived in Mitzrayim. And the commentators, the Kabbalists, they all say that those were the best years of his life and fulfillment on some level of his request for a tranquil life experience in this world. And that brings up a question that I think we all must ask. I don't think anyone could read through the Parsha of Vayechi and find out, according to the Zohar, that Yaakov had the ultimate years of his life in Mitzrayim and not ask the question. Mitzrayim is known as the worst place on earth, the most immoral, immodest, thievery, backstabbing. I mean, they betrayed Yosef himself and the brothers of Yosef. They took everything they could from Yosef. Yosef built them an empire, and they said to Yosef, now that we don't need you, to heck with you and your family. They turned us into slaves, his children, his grandchildren. So we see the mentality of Egypt, selfish, corrupt, obviously in the realm of morality and sexuality, they were as bad as one can imagine. So the question is this: Yaakov is coming. Yaakov, great, Tati, Zayde, the father and grandfather and great-grandfather of Jewish kinderlich, the Jewish children, a wholesome people, a wholesome nation. They're moving, all 70 of them. This reminds me of that. Was an old-time show where there was some guy from the West that struck oil. I don't know if I forget the name of this. This was a TV show. Basically, he was a very simple person from one of these country states in America that are just very like it's a farmland and like a cowboy type. And they struck oil, and he said, "That's it. We're moving to L.A." And he moved to L.A. It was a cute type of I guess one of those sitcoms that they had in the olden days. So that's the idea. Yaakov and his family are coming from Canaan, a peaceful life, a holy life, a life of shepherds. And they're moving to Manhattan, 40th and Broadway. Imagine. Tell Rav Chaim Kanievsky and his family to move to 40th and Broadway. Could you imagine Rav Chaim Kanievsky and his family on 40th and Broadway? By the way, do me a favor, Yankala, run to the corner grocery store and get me some milk for the coffee. And by the way, on your way there, don't look at the nightclubs, don't look at the strip clubs, don't look at the insanity on the streets, the billboards that are larger than life. Don't look at any of that. How in the world could Yaakov have lived the best years of his life knowing that he's going to now live them out in Egypt, which is probably worse than 48th and Broadway? But I don't know if you could get worse than 48th and Broadway. Can anyone imagine a place more void of purpose and morality and goodness? Can anyone think of a place in the world that has less, that's worse than 48th and Broadway? And give me some. Should we talk about the worst places in the world? South Beach, LA, New York City. See, that's what I wanted you to understand. It's not only one place in the world, it's the entire world. Modern Hellenistic culture has created a world that we can't even be a part of. Real human beings can't even be a part of the world that they're creating out there. And the insanity just gets worse and worse. You watch the news. It's insane. You have simple parents going to a city meeting to talk about the welfare of their children in the schools they're in, complaining about that they're showing my children pornography, and they shut the mic on him. And then they label it domestic terrorism. Parents that want goodness for their children, it's domestic terrorism today in America. Back to the story. So Yaakov is coming to Mitzrayim, and we're told that these are the best years of his life. How? How could he be comfortable? What about his children? What about his grandchildren, great-grandchildren? On some level, we see that he should have been concerned, because we are told that the Jews reached the 49th level of impurity. And one more step, it would have been game over. And Hashem had to come right away and take us out to save us. So Egypt was a very dangerous place spiritually for the Jewish people. How could he have been content that we're going to come there and everything's going to be okay, we're going to live it, we're going to survive? How did he know that? How could he be happy in that circumstance? So I think that we have 2 or 3 messages which will really tell us today how we are able to survive and how we're really ultimately going to make it. And we're going to greet Mashiach, and we're going to really continue to live here in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, B'mher B'yameinu, and forever. So here's what I think the answer is. The very first thing Yaakov does before he steps 1 foot in Mitzrayim and before he brings any one of his children or grandchildren to Mitzrayim is he sends Yehudah in front of him to Egypt. First, to do one thing, which is the foundation of Jewish survival, to build a Beit Talmud, to build a yeshiva. That's the first thing he did. He built a yeshiva. What's so important about building a yeshiva? So let me tell you a little bit of U.S. history, American history. In America, when Jews moved to America from Europe, they built synagogues. What was the result of those synagogues? Empty buildings 25, 30 years later, empty buildings that ended up becoming churches in cases. When you build a synagogue, that becomes like a body without a soul. When you build a yeshiva, then you have the soul. So he built a yeshiva in Mitzrayim, and that's the answer today everywhere. When you build yeshivas and you have a connection to the Torah, then you survive, then you live on. Without the Torah, we have nothing in common with Abraham and nothing in common with Mashiach that's coming to save the day in the end of the day. Without Torah, we're disconnected. And Yaakov understood that if we're going to go to Mitzrayim and we're going to have a chance to survive, the first building that's going to exist there, that's going to be one of our buildings, is going to be the yeshiva. Then we'll build homes. First the yeshiva, then homes. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, beautiful part of the story, I think, is that he understood that Yosef was alive and well. And when I say well, I don't mean he was a billionaire. He was a billionaire. But that's not the well that I mean. He understood that Yosef was the same Yosef that left him. His prized child that understood all of the ways of Hashem that Yaakov taught him. He understood that Yosef went to Mitzrayim and was there and stayed alive. His soul was thriving. He was a godly man, a holy man. And when he understood that, he understood there is hope. Now, let me explain to you a little bit about Yosef and his survival in Mitzrayim. We bless our children to be like his children because they're the children that grew up in Gullus. They grew up in Gullus. In fact, actually, all of the tribes were born in Gullus. Right? And that's an interesting thing. I saw it in a Hasidic discussion that why did all of the tribes have to be born in Gullus? Because Hashem saw that the Jews would be in Gullus. And the fact that the 12 tribes were born in Gullus, that's where we get the power and the ability to survive in Gullus. But more than that, the Ephraim and Menashe, those 2 children were raised in Gulut because the tribes were born by Lavan, but they right away went with Yaakov back to Canaan, which is considered a level of Israel in some way, even then. So even though they were born in Gullus, they didn't grow up in Gullus. But Yosef and his sons grew up in Mitzrayim, on 40th and Broadway. So, and they survived, and they were righteous. So that was a sign of hope, a light in the darkness, that if Yosef could survive, then he paved the way for the Jews to survive. About Yosef specifically, it says that when the brothers of Yosef came to see him in Mitzrayim, they didn't recognize him. And that's a question. I mean, I'm shocked by it when I learned the storyline. Maybe you all have that question. How could you come to see your brother that you saw every day? You ate together. You tried to kill him. I forget that part. You ate together. You were friends. How could you not recognize your brother? So on a simple level, Rashi helps us out and says that he was a grown man now. He had a beard. When they left him, he wasn't such a grown man. He didn't have a beard. But still, you're looking into these eyes. You have no recognition at all. You don't see anything of Yosef in there. So there are 2 simple answers. One is the beard and his physical look. 2 is if you're not expecting to find something there, you're not going to find it. You ever a thought or a circumstance, if it's out of your entire mindset that there's a possibility, you won't think of that possibility. Once it's in your mindset, you might think of it. So it's true they were looking for Yosef in Mitzrayim, but they were not looking for Yosef to be the king of Mitzrayim, the leader of Mitzrayim. So since the last thing in the world they would ever believe that's him, they didn't have an ability to look and see that was him. That's all according to the sort of pshat type of way of understanding it. But there's a beautiful explanation I saw, I believe, in a Hasidic sefer that says this. What does it mean they didn't recognize Yosef? Yosef's path in divine service was so far out, so light years ahead of them, that they couldn't recognize him or it because it's something that we're never used to. They never heard of going to Broadway, 40th and Broadway, and being a Jew there. They understood how to be a shepherd in Canaan and be holy and be spiritual and make yichudim and reach Atzilut. They didn't once fathom, how can you reach Atzilut in Mitzrayim? And the pasuk says, V'Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei et Yosef. The Ben Ish Chai says that Yosef was an Atzilut in Mitzrayim, not in Galut. Hashem was with him in everything he did, on all levels, on all levels. And that's what they didn't recognize. They couldn't recognize and see that way of serving Hashem. And this brings to another important idea. The Baal Shem Tov says that sometimes, again, Torah is what life is all about, and fulfilling the Torah and living the Torah is what life is all about. But sometimes Hashem says, I'm going to make you close that book. That's for someone who's a masmid, someone who studies all day long. I'm going to make you close that book. You know why? I want you to do other things for me. I don't want you to just sit and learn for me. I want you to do other things for me. Hashem took Yosef from that tranquil place and threw him in Mitzrayim and said, I want you to serve me in Mitzrayim. The way you're going to have to learn how to do in Mitzrayim was a big chiddush. And that's what he says that applies to all people. Hashem wants many different types of service for him, many different circumstances and places. And that's actually one of the secret ideas why the Jews, in fact, were sent to Galut. It says the Jews were not sent into exile except for one thing, to raise the sparks of holiness and to bring the potential converts that are trapped out there in the Galut back to the way of Judaism. That's why we were sent out into Galut, and that's why Yosef was sent to Mitzrayim. There were sparks of holiness that needed to be elevated in Mitzrayim. Anyway, that's what it means that they didn't recognize Yosef, is because it was a chidush. The word Yosef means to increase, to add, to grow. That chidush that Yosef represented was new to them, and that's why they didn't recognize him. And that's the chiddush that was what kept us alive and helped us survive in Mitzrayim. So we have now two reasons why we could say that Yaakov felt reassured that we're going to make it. And those two reasons were, again, a yeshiva, Torah learning, but not just Torah learning for the pursuit of knowledge, but a Beit Talmud is to learn the practical application of what Jewish life is. The Talmud is a recording of Jewish life and practice, not just ideas. Nothing in the Talmud is there because it's just an idea. It's an idea that has to come somehow affect our life, permeate our life, and permeate the world. And so that's what we built. We built in Egypt, first of all, the foundation of Jewish living, and we were able to survive. That's number one. Number two, Yosef and his children showed us how we can navigate through those difficult situations and also stay pure and holy. The third thing, which I think is what really solidified it for the Jewish people, is this. In the end of the day, I talked about 40th and Broadway, but that's not where you can make your house. It's true. You can have a Chabad Shliach in 40th and Broadway, putting on tefillin, giving women Shabbos candles. And it's funny, with the person that walks by, the one that looks like he's got an attitude, the one that doesn't look Jewish at all, that's looking at you a little bit funny, that's the Jewish one. This funny story, if it's real or not, but, a Jewish guy walking by, and he's got, earrings, that's whatever his look is. It's a very unique look, so to speak. So he decides to ask the Rebbe, what are you doing here? What are you doing here over here? What are you trying to come to make all this noise? And so they start conversation. So he's kind of questioning, why do you have that beard? Why are you wearing this hat? Why do you look so different? So he says to him, so let me ask you, why do you look the way you look? So he says, well, actually, I look like this because I'm unique. This is the way I want to express myself. He goes, that's funny because you're the 20th person I saw that looked like that. So what does it really mean to be unique and original? That's a different discussion for another time. At the end of the day, I think the secret to the survival of the Jewish people, Yosef himself figured it out and ordained and arranged that it should happen that way with Hashem's help. And that is right away when the brothers were brought in front of Paro. Paro said, I want to see your brothers. Why did Paro want to see his brothers? Think for a minute. Why do you think Paro was so interested in seeing Yosef's brothers? If Yosef made Paro and Egypt a gazillionaire country, whatever the highest, he made them the richest country in the world. There wasn't even a second to them. There was no second to them. If that's what Yosef did for Egypt, how much would the rest of his brothers be able to contribute to them? They would just have owned the world forever. So he said, let me see your brothers. Let me see what they can do for me. How can I become even more rich and powerful with the help of your brothers? Yosef understood that. If Paro's plan would have happened, he would have taken not only Yosef to be in Mitzrayim, the actual 40th and Broadway, he would have taken all the brothers too, and all of the family right there, 40th and Broadway. Yosef planned and prepped his brothers. First, he took the weakest of his brothers. And he told them what to say. He said, when Paro asks you, what you're all about, what you do. This is what you tell him. Now I'm going to change the story to my version, and then we'll go back to the real version. Actually, I don't know which way to go first. This is a bit more shocking, so we'll go with my version. So imagine the meeting. We're making a modern meeting. Let's imagine there was this Wall Street Mongol called Joseph who made Donald Trump, the billionaire, even more billions. So Joseph says, I got my brothers coming to town. He says, I want to meet them because they're going to make me more money. So imagine the conversation. You have, Donald Trump, the billionaire, and the brothers of this nice, smart, successful businessman Joseph and his brothers. His brothers come. And so Donald Trump says, tell me something. What do you guys do? What are you all about? I was conversating. What do you do? What's your profession? And the head brother, well, Mr. Trump, let me tell you, we're garbage men. Yeah, garbage men? He's shocked. The dollar signs are turning to tears. He had dollar signs in his eyes. Did I hear garbage? Garbage is our life. Anything you want to know about garbage, you just ask us. We're the best on garbage men in the world. That's our life. So now let's explain the way it really happened. So Yosef tells his brothers before he brings them to Paro to tell Paro that you are shepherds. Now, appreciating what shepherds meant in that time and place, so we can see from the story that comes before, we see that Yosef and the Egyptians did not even eat at the same table as his brothers. That's because being a shepherd was something so looked down upon, so abhorred by the Egyptians themselves, which were considered a modern, ideal elite type of society with their particular way of life and their views. So shepherds and Egyptians were like oil and water. They did not mix at all. And that's what Yosef told them to say. We're garbage men. And the message was loud and clear. We can do nothing for you, Paro. Leave us alone. And Paro says exactly what Yosef wanted. Yosef comes and says, let's put him in Goshen. Paro says, let's get him as far away from here as possible. This is enough. I'm embarrassed enough from this conversation. And they went to Goshen. Goshen was what we call, the beginning of what we call a suburb. And even more so. The Ben Ish Chai actually says Goshen had a level of holiness because it was actually a piece of land that the original Paro gave Sarah in the olden days. So there was already a little bit of holiness in Goshen, and it was removed far away from the city, the metropolis of Egypt. And that's how we survived. Yosef had the solutions to all of the problems. He arranged, with Hashem's help, that we should be in Goshen, not in Mitzrayim. And that's how we survived. And that's the idea of Jewish preservation, the idea of this insulation, the idea of being protected, Jewish community, Jewish life, Jewish lifestyle. Because if you're in the middle of the spotlight, if you're in the middle of all the action, then you will get lost in that action. It's impossible not to have it affect you. Not everybody's a Yosef. Knowing that, Yosef said, you guys have to stay in Goshen. With all that, we can now appreciate and understand Vayechi Yaakov Avinu Mitzrayim, that Yaakov lived and thrived and understood that we're going to make it out of here one day. Shabbos.